Hello and welcome to this Thursday edition of FreightWaves Now. I'm your host Anthony Smith, and we have a full lineup for you today. Luke Falasca is going to give us a broker update. We also have Andrew Cox with a shipper update. But first, we're going to go to Zach Strickland with the carrier update, brought to you by PowerFleet. Stay tuned.
Everyone, and welcome to your Thursday carrier update presented by PowerFleet. I'm Zach Strickland, and today we're watching volumes continue to drop for both dry van and reefer. But overall, we're seeing a little bit more resistance on the reefer volume side. As you're looking at the chart here, ROTVI down here in the blue line took about 24 days from March 1st to get up to peak volumes, roughly 70% higher than they were on March 1st, and now it's taken them another, probably just a few days less than the dry van. We're talking about 14 days, about 2 weeks, and we're still not quite at the same level that we were when we began this journey. So, we're still staying a little bit stickier on the reefer volumes. Dry van, of course, has already fallen below where they were back on March 1st. It only took them 16 days to erase, or 14 days to erase all the gains that they got earlier in the month, and now it is down below it 16 days later, 26.59% under, less than they were at peak. Volumes continue to drop rather rapidly right now. Looking at a map of the head haul index. We talked about this yesterday. Head haul is the outbound volumes minus the inbound volumes. So anytime you have a positive value on the head haul index, that indicates that you have potential for, more freight leaving that market, less capacity. There's more of a threat to tightening capacity in those markets. Anytime you have more inbound than outbound, you're going to have a little bit looser market because you're going to have a lot more trucks coming into that market servicing that freight. Anything in blue here indicates an increasing head haul index value week over week. Looking at some of the darker markets here scattered throughout the country, we got Lakeland, you got up here around South Bend, Fort Wayne, Indiana, showing increasing head haul index value. So you're going to have more freight leaving that market versus entering the market week over week. Doesn't necessarily mean that market all of a sudden becomes a head haul market. If it's significantly backhaul like the Lakeland market is, it just means that it is transitioning to a more head haul market versus what it was last week. So looking at Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, this has been a strong head haul market over the last month, as we've seen a lot of freight exiting this area. A lot of it's going into the megalopolis up here in New York City, servicing all those areas where there's tons of population, lots more consumer products that they need to deliver up there. Watching that market really deteriorate in terms of freight balance. So carriers really need to pay attention up here, because that's going to put a severe downward pressure on rates over time if this condition continues to accelerate like we're seeing right there. Out here in Denver, Colorado, again, Denver, surprising market, continues to show somewhat of an outbound growth signature, not necessarily overall, but it's still becoming a little bit of a tighter market compared to this time last week. A little surprising, considering that this area is normally considered more of a backhaul area, but we have seen this condition persist throughout March, all the way starting back in February. So Denver, not quite the black hole for freight as it once was. Looking at the weather overlay on top of this, we're going to see a lot of snow showers showing up here. Not a lot of travel delays, more than likely, though, through the Midwest. They're used to that up there, so don't expect anything major. Out in California, however, you might have some flooding potential if you are coming across the country on 40 or a 10 out there coming out of Southern California. So looking at our volatility map, you can see everything is dropping in terms of volume, in terms of rejection rates, etc. So again, the market is still going into a far more loose and a far more stable condition. Looking at our Harrisburg market here, outbound volumes showing up here in the blue mountain right here, you can see they're still exceeding the inbound volumes, which is what you tend to expect in this area, but the outbound volumes are falling at a much faster rate than the inbound volumes are, which is why you're seeing that red marker on the index map that I had pulled up there. What it's doing to rejection rates? Rejection rates are plummeting extremely fast, real fast here. Lakeland, Florida, it was the opposite condition up there, where we saw the darker blue on the map. We're seeing outbound volumes or inbound volumes continue to stay, they're dropping a lot faster than the outbound volumes are. Outbound volumes are staying a little bit more sticky. Rejection rates right here, taking a little bit quick hit up. So capacity is tightening a little bit in the Lakeland market. And that'll do it for today's carrier update.
The comprehensive logistics offerings from PowerFleet cover in-cab ELD, fleet management, trailer tracking, cargo monitoring, and tracking other assets such as chassis and intermodal containers. Power up your operations with PowerFleet.
Hi, good morning everyone. I'm Luke Falasca bringing you another broker update. And today we're actually going to be covering a lot of reefer freight. So let's dive in. So we've got this blue line here. That is the reefer volume levels in the United States. It followed a very similar path to the dry van volume levels, except it actually took a little bit longer to start the uptick. We started right around March 11th, 12th range, versus the dry van freight surge that we saw started around the beginning of March. So now it spiked, and it took about half the time to get to the top. So we spiked right around March 27th. There we saw a massive surge. Actually, we saw about a 45% surge in reefer volume levels versus dry van. We saw about a 30% surge. So a lot more surge in reefer volume. All that's that consumer buying, that panic buying there that we're very used to, having to restock. A lot of restaurants got closed or weren't operating, so everybody was eating a lot more at home, so they had to replenish from the grocery store, so there's a lot more demand. But we're falling off as people kind of settle down a little bit from that panic buying. So our reefer volume levels are actually right back to where we started. They're right back to where they were in early March and late February. So where they typically sit. Now this orange line is the reefer tender rejections, sitting at about 15%. Those reefer tender rejections are still falling. Now they're not quite back down to their normal levels yet. They're still a little bit elevated. Right now, reefer tender rejections typically sit in the 10 to 11% range, and we're sitting at 15% right now. So they're still a little elevated. Spot market rates are a little elevated, but they might come back down. They usually take a little bit longer to follow volume levels, so you might start to see that come back down, and capacity may loosen. Now, just because everything's coming down, there are still plenty of opportunities to make money out there. So what I've got here for you, this is the 7-day change in reefer outbound volume levels in the United States. So this is as of this morning. The markets in white and red are where volume levels are decreasing. So no surprise there, they far outweigh the markets in blue, and the markets in blue are where reefer volume levels are increasing. So there's still, since we're seeing volume levels decrease overall, it's no surprise there's a lot more red and white, but there are plenty areas of blue where volume levels are increasing, like San Francisco, Seattle, San Diego. We're seeing a little bit of increases there over on the West Coast. Minneapolis is seeing some increases, Cedar Rapids, a little bit there. Look over here too. In this very densely populated area of Philly, Harrisburg, DC, Pittsburgh. There's a lot going on there. And then a little bit down here, once you get south of Atlanta, in Macon, Georgia, and Jacksonville, some of those areas, you're starting to see a big increase in reefer volumes. So these are some places you're going to want to focus some sales calls on today. Hopefully you'll land some shippers that are putting out a little bit more freight. Now remember, this is the volume levels. We're going to look at the rejection levels next. I can't make this up. Look over here in the Northeast. Pretty much from the Carolinas up is nearly all blue. That means that the 7-day change of reefer tender rejections is increasing. So while volume levels are falling nearly across the board, outbound volumes, rejections are still going up in a lot of those Northeast markets. What that means is there's just less freight going into those markets, so there's less carriers to supply that outbound volume. So if you're calling shippers, you're going to want to really focus here in the Northeast today for reefer freight. You're going to have much better opportunities than focusing elsewhere. If you have customers in these areas, call them. They might have capacity constraints, and you might be able to swoop in and get a little bit of freight. Now quickly here, we're going to look at the Charlotte market. This market, not a huge market, but still a pretty big player. The reefer tender rejections are here in blue on the left. You can see here from right in April, we surged from about 3.5% to 10%. We're still at that 10% range. We're holding very, very well, which means that capacity is a lot tighter than typical. And a lot of that is due over here on your right, the volume levels. Inbound volume levels are falling at a much faster rate than outbound volume levels, meaning that capacity is actually tightening, and that's why rejections are staying up. I'm Luke, and that'll do it for today's broker update.
Voices from every corner of the supply chain concerning all modes of transportation. From the world's largest logistics podcast network, this is what the Freight Tech Revolution sounds like. Freightcast presented by FreightWaves. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to your shipper update. I'm here with Andrew Cox. Andrew, what's the latest?
Anthony, we're talking again this week about initial jobless claims. This is a data set that comes out every Thursday, and it gives us a really good real-time look at the unemployment situation. Whereas the unemployment rate is kind of a lagging indicator, and it takes weeks to prepare, as it's a household survey. This is a data collected piece of data, so this really helps us get a real-time look at the unemployment. So again, this is at a historical chart back to 1970. We had never broken above 700,000 weekly jobless claims in 1 week. For the past 3 weeks, we've had 16 million people in total that have applied for unemployment benefits. So last week we hit the peak, or 2 weeks ago, pardon me, we hit the peak at 6.9 million, and we came in this week with another 6.6 million people applying for unemployment benefits for the first time.
Right, and so this is, as you mentioned, is widespread, right? So the unemployment numbers that come out, they're a little bit lagged. They don't really kind of show their accurate representation. Typically in the past, this has been okay because we haven't seen a lot of variances, but times are different now. We're seeing things change on a macro level week to week to week. So looking at this jobless claims number is definitely very critical to kind of seeing what the exact landscape is for many Americans out there. And so as you mentioned, 6.6 million. So this is like another astronomical number. I mean, we can look at the historical trends here. This is a complete different league, and I think one of the biggest takeaways is that this is also a statewide index, and so when we're looking at this varies from state to state. I think some of the highest numbers came from, of course, California, New York, Michigan, areas that are really being impacted the most by the ongoing pandemic.
Yeah, it is, and you see places like Philadelphia and other places across the country that have completely shut down some industries. If we wanted to, again, there are two separate ways to conduct the surveys. The unemployment rate is done by a household survey, and these are done by a collection of everyone that's applying for benefits. But if we use the weekly jobless claims to kind of back into an unemployment rate, these are the last 3 weeks, and this was our starting point at the beginning of March. We had 5.7 million Americans unemployed at that time. If we add all these together, we get to 22 million Americans roughly that are unemployed currently. Out of our 163 million labor force, we're looking at an unemployment rate nearly 13 or 14%. This is in line with some of the other estimates I've seen. Former Fed Chair Yellen said it was between 12 and 13%. That was before we got this newest weekly jobless claims number. So the truth is that that 4.4% that we saw in March, or for the March unemployment rate, is grossly understated, and the unemployment situation right now is pretty bleak.
It is, and one of the big things about this is like it's changed so rapidly, right? So one of the other expectations that many are having is that maybe on the other side of this, what does recovery look like? Is there going to be a rapid tick up, and what kind of things are going to need to influence that? So we see that there's been bills passed for, I think the Fed announced just today, was it 2.3 trillion potentially for small businesses to kind of really allocate a payroll protection program? Yeah,
all of the different bodies that we have in this country are doing their best to try to curtail the issues that are at play here. But the truth is that things are happening, you're right, things are happening so fast that the legislation that's going through, it's taking weeks and weeks to happen, and then that takes weeks and weeks for it to actually get implemented. People need money now. The businesses are in trouble. They're having to make tough decisions, and you're seeing those tough decisions result in a lot of millions of Americans losing their jobs. And that weighs on the psyche of the American consumer moving forward. Yes, these people may get their jobs back, but it's likely not going to be immediately as quickly as they lost their jobs. So this might be a slower recovery than we might think. But we do have some good news coming out of retail, things that we've reported on in the last week, that retail numbers are not so bad in the areas where lockdowns are kind of less stringent. So there is thought there could be a quick, wider retail recovery when this is contained.
Excellent. Andrew, thank you so much. Insightful as always. And where can we get more insights from you and your team?
Yeah, so you can go to freightwaves.com/passport. We actually have a project that we did with Redwood Logistics. It's a retail survey and a piece that we did on kind of retail consumption and retail. It'll be coming out this afternoon, so be looking out for that. That'll be a free report. It'll be up on freightwaves.com.
Excellent, Andrew. Thank you so much. And thank you for tuning in. That's going to do for this edition of FreightWaves Now. The content doesn't stop here. We're always streaming around the clock, so check us out on all your favorite streaming platforms, including Apple TV. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.